In the dimly lit funeral home of Meridian, Mississippi, on a humid August afternoon in 1998, a scene unfolded that would expose decades of family secrets and systematic deception. Reverend Thomas Washington sat in the back row of his father's funeral service, watching relatives who had barely acknowledged his existence suddenly appear to claim their share of Samuel Washington's modest estate. The man who had raised 6 children while working double shifts at the local mill was being mourned by people who had spent years questioning whether Thomas deserved to call Samuel his father. The reading that followed the service revealed the painful hierarchy that had defined Thomas's entire life. His half-sister Margaret, the product of Samuel's brief marriage to a light-skinned woman, inherited the family home, a modest 2-story house that had been in the Washington family for 3 generations. Thomas, whose darker skin had made him the target of colorism within his own family, received only his father's weathered oak desk and the bitter reminder that even in death, his legitimacy remained questioned. The distinction wasn't subtle. Margaret, who had enjoyed privileges throughout her life because her lighter complexion allowed her to pass in certain social circles, was now the beneficiary of property worth tens of thousands of dollars. Thomas, whose ministerial salary barely covered his family's basic needs, was left with a piece of furniture that seemed to symbolize his position as the family's afterthought. The family dynamics that had shaped this unequal distribution were complex and painful. Samuel Washington had carried secrets throughout his life, navigating the treacherous waters of 1950s Mississippi, where a black man's survival often depended on carefully managing perceptions about his family's racial makeup. Thomas's mother had died when he was young, and Samuel's subsequent marriage to a woman whose mixed heritage provided social advantages had created a household where skin tone determined treatment. Thomas had grown up watching his half-sister receive opportunities that were denied to him: better schools, social connections, and family support that reflected the cruel mathematics of colorism in the Jim Crow South. Margaret's lighter skin had opened doors that remained closed to Thomas, despite his superior academic achievements and moral character that had led him to the ministry. The desk itself seemed like a cruel joke. While Margaret inherited property that could provide financial security for generations, Thomas received a piece of furniture that reminded him daily of his secondary status within his own family. The symbolism was obvious. She got the foundation, he got the furniture. She inherited the legacy, he inherited the labor. As Thomas loaded the heavy oak desk into his pickup truck, he felt the weight of a lifetime's accumulated injustices. Every family gathering where he had been treated as less deserving, every opportunity that had gone to Margaret instead of him, every moment when his darker skin had made him an embarrassment, to relatives who valued proximity to whiteness above family loyalty, but the desk held secrets that would challenge everything Thomas thought. He knew about his family's history and his father's true intentions. 3 weeks after the funeral, Thomas Washington was cleaning out his father's desk in his small parsonage office when he made a discovery that would shatter everything he thought he understood about his inheritance and his family's history. The desk had been his constant companion since childhood, a place where he had done homework while his father worked late into the night, writing sermons and managing the business of being a black minister in Mississippi's hostile racial climate. As Thomas removed decades of accumulated papers, church bulletins, and personal correspondence, he noticed that one of the desk drawers seemed shorter than the others. His carpenter's instincts, developed through years of maintaining his modest church building, told him that the proportions were wrong. Running his hands along the interior, he discovered what appeared to be a thin seam that suggested a false bottom. The hidden compartment required patience to open, its mechanism designed to remain undetected unless someone knew exactly what to look for. When Thomas finally managed to lift the concealed panel, he found documents that would redefine his understanding of his father's life and his own place in the family legacy. The papers told a story of deception, survival, and sacrifice that spanned decades. Samuel Washington hadn't been the simple mill worker that everyone believed. He had been a shrewd businessman who had quietly accumulated significant property holdings throughout Mississippi and Alabama. The modest lifestyle that Thomas remembered was actually an elaborate cover designed to protect assets from both racist white authorities and envious family members who might endanger the family's safety through careless talk. The most shocking discovery was a complete set of property deeds showing that Samuel had owned not just the family home, but also significant commercial real estate in 3 counties. The mill job had been supplemental income to his real business of buying distressed properties from desperate white farmers during the Depression and holding them through carefully constructed legal arrangements that obscured his ownership. But the documents revealed something even more devastating. The will that had given Margaret the house while leaving Thomas with only the desk had been a deliberately constructed deception. Samuel had created a second, secret will that revealed his true intentions for the family estate, intentions that had been hidden to protect his children from both external threats and internal family conflicts. The real will, dated just months before Samuel's death, told a completely different story about inheritance and family loyalty. Thomas discovered that his father had been protecting him from knowledge that could have endangered his life in 1950s Mississippi, where a black man's accumulation of significant wealth was literally a death sentence if discovered by the wrong people. As Thomas read through documents that revealed the scope of his father's hidden business empire, he began to understand that the desk itself had been chosen carefully. It wasn't a consolation prize or a symbol of his secondary status. It was a repository for information that would make him one of the wealthiest black men in Mississippi, if he could figure out how to claim his inheritance without destroying his family or endangering his life. The authentic will that Thomas discovered in his father's desk revealed a truth so stunning that he had to read it 3 times before accepting its reality. Samuel Washington hadn't left his son a piece of furniture. He had left him an empire. The document, witnessed and notarized by a black lawyer in Jackson, who had maintained Samuel's legal affairs in absolute secrecy, showed that Thomas was the sole heir to property holdings worth over $2 million in 1998 values. The false will that had been read at the funeral was part of an elaborate protection scheme that Samuel had constructed to shield his true wealth from a society that would have murdered him for accumulating such assets. The house that Margaret had inherited was actually the least valuable part of Samuel's holdings, a deliberate misdirection designed to satisfy family expectations while hiding the real treasure from those who might misuse or endanger it. Samuel's business empire was staggering in its scope and sophistication. During the 1940s and 1950s, he had systematically purchased distressed properties from white farmers who were desperate for cash during economic downturns. Using intermediaries and complex legal arrangements, he had accumulated farmland, commercial buildings, and residential properties across 3 states while maintaining the facade of being a simple mill worker. The documents revealed that Samuel had been one of the most successful black entrepreneurs in the South, building wealth through a combination of careful planning, strategic timing, and absolute discretion about his activities. His mill job had provided the perfect cover, regular income that explained his modest lifestyle, while his real profits were reinvested in additional property acquisitions. But the papers also revealed why Samuel had chosen Thomas as his true heir rather than Margaret. Despite her social advantages and lighter skin, Margaret had demonstrated character flaws that made her unsuitable for managing significant wealth. Samuel's private notes documented her gambling problems, her associations with dangerous people, and her inability to maintain the discretion that wealth accumulation required in their hostile environment. Thomas, despite facing greater racial discrimination due to his darker skin, had shown the moral character and careful judgment that Samuel believed were essential for protecting and growing the family's hidden fortune. His decision to enter the ministry hadn't disappointed his father. It had confirmed Samuel's assessment that Thomas possessed the ethical foundation necessary for handling great responsibility. The revelation was overwhelming. Thomas realized that his entire life had been shaped by his father's secret plans, from the encouragement to pursue education despite family poverty to the subtle lessons about discretion and careful planning that had seemed like general moral guidance, but were actually preparation for inheriting a business empire. The fake will had served multiple purposes. It had protected Thomas from premature knowledge that could have endangered him. It had satisfied Margaret's expectations without giving her access to real wealth, and it had maintained the family's protective facade of modest circumstances, while transferring actual power to the son who had proven himself worthy of such trust. Now Thomas faced the challenge of claiming his inheritance without exposing himself to the dangers that had forced his father to live such an elaborate deception for decades. The decision to challenge the false will required Thomas Washington to risk everything he had built as a respected minister in exchange for a legacy that could transform his family's future for generations. Armed with his father's hidden documents, Thomas approached attorney Marcus Williams, one of Mississippi's most successful black lawyers, whose reputation for discretion made him the perfect advocate for such a sensitive case. Williams' initial assessment was sobering. While the documents Thomas had discovered were legally compelling, challenging an already executed will would require proving that the first document was deliberately fraudulent rather than simply outdated. The legal battle would expose Samuel's secret business empire to scrutiny that could still be dangerous, even in 1998 Mississippi, where successful black entrepreneurs faced ongoing hostility from those who resented their prosperity. The evidence Thomas presented was overwhelming. The hidden will was more recent than the public document. It had been properly witnessed by credible professionals, and it was accompanied by detailed financial records that proved Samuel's true net worth. But Margaret's legal team, funded by her new inheritance, argued that the second will was a forgery created by Thomas to steal his sister's rightful property. The family dynamics that emerged during the legal proceedings were devastating. Margaret's lighter skin had provided her with social advantages throughout her life, but it had also connected her to social circles that included people who viewed any black accumulation of wealth as inherently suspicious. Her legal strategy involved portraying Samuel as incapable of the sophisticated business dealings that the documents described, essentially arguing that her father had been too ignorant to accumulate significant wealth. Thomas's legal team faced the challenge of proving that Samuel had been a brilliant businessman while explaining why he had hidden his success from his own family. The testimony revealed the complex psychological pressures that successful black entrepreneurs had faced during the Jim Crow era, when visible prosperity could literally be a death sentence if it attracted the wrong attention. The proceedings exposed uncomfortable truths about colorism within black families. Margaret's legal arguments relied partly on the assumption that her lighter skin made her more suitable for managing valuable property, while Thomas's darker complexion somehow disqualified him from inheriting significant wealth. The racism that had shaped their family dynamics was being replicated in legal arguments that challenged Thomas's worthiness based on appearance rather than character. As the case proceeded, evidence mounted that Samuel's business activities had been both extensive and carefully documented. Bank records, property transactions, and business correspondence proved that he had been operating a sophisticated investment empire while maintaining perfect secrecy about his activities. The man his family had known as a simple mill worker had actually been one of the most successful black businessmen in the South. The legal battle consumed months and threatened to bankrupt Thomas through legal fees, but the evidence was undeniable. Samuel Washington had indeed accumulated significant wealth, and he had deliberately chosen Thomas as his heir based on character assessments that had proven accurate over decades of observation. The court's decision came on a grey February morning in 1999, 9 months after Thomas Washington had discovered his father's hidden legacy. Judge Patricia Morrison's ruling was unequivocal. The second will was authentic, the first had been deliberately fraudulent, and Thomas was the rightful heir to Samuel Washington's entire estate. The hidden business empire that Samuel had spent decades building would finally pass to the son he had chosen based on character rather than appearance. Margaret's reaction to the verdict revealed the depth of colorism that had poisoned the family's relationships for generations. Her sense of entitlement to the inheritance had been based not on merit or her father's wishes, but on assumptions about her superior worthiness due to her lighter skin. The legal defeat forced her to confront the reality that Samuel had judged his children based on character rather than the racial hierarchies that had shaped the community's social structure. The property transfer that followed was staggering in its scope. Thomas discovered that he owned commercial buildings in Jackson, residential properties in 3 states, and farmland that generated significant rental income. The mill worker's son, who had been told he deserved only a desk, was actually one of the wealthiest black men in Mississippi, inheriting assets that his father had accumulated through decades of careful planning and strategic investment. The revelation transformed Thomas's understanding of his father's life and motivations. Every lesson about discretion, every encouragement to pursue education, every moment of apparent disappointment about Thomas's career choices had been part of Samuel's careful preparation for this inheritance. The ministry that Thomas had chosen hadn't been a rejection of worldly success. It had been the perfect training for managing wealth responsibly. Samuel's business records revealed the sophisticated thinking that had enabled a black man to accumulate significant wealth in Jim Crow, Mississippi. His investment strategies had been brilliant, his legal arrangements had been flawless, and his discretion had been absolute. The empire he had built would have impressed Wall Street financiers, yet he had managed it all while working a factory job and raising 6 children. Thomas used his inheritance to establish the Samuel Washington Foundation, which provided educational scholarships and business development loans to young black entrepreneurs throughout the South. The wealth that his father had accumulated through careful secrecy became a tool for empowering others who faced similar barriers to economic advancement. The desk that had seemed like such a meager inheritance became Thomas's most treasured possession, not because of its monetary value, but because of what it represented about his father's trust and planning. The piece of furniture that had hidden a fortune became a symbol of how appearances could deceive and how true value often remained invisible to those who judged based on superficial characteristics. Margaret eventually reconciled with Thomas, acknowledging that their father's decision had been based on wisdom rather than favoritism. The house she had inherited, while valuable, represented only a fraction of Samuel's true legacy, a legacy that required the moral character and careful judgment that Thomas had demonstrated throughout his life. Today, the Samuel Washington Foundation continues to transform lives throughout the South, proving that Samuel's hidden wealth had indeed found its way to the son who could use it most effectively to honor his father's memory while advancing the cause of economic justice for future generations.